They turned west in the direction of the sea, and were soon deep in the salt marshes, floundering about among the reeds and mud, stepping from a bit of firm ground into ooze and water, and then climbing again onto tussocks or low banks. Gulls and marsh birds screamed overhead. A great heron lumbered out of the tall grasses near them, and went flapping away, and something alive and frightened splashed into a pool behind them. "Do you know just where the place is?" asked Hugh, panting in his efforts to keep his footing. "Not exactly from this direction, but I believe there is a remnant of an old road out here somewhere, on a ridge that is above the water and dry. If we can find that and get onto it, we'll be all right, for it leads straight to Beckery. Brother Simon said it did." And soon they could distinguish it, a ridge of higher land and the vague suggestion of a road, scarcely more upon it. At one time it had probably connected the abbey grounds with the seashore, but it had long since been abandoned and fallen into ruin and decay. However, even in its broken and dilapidated state, the old road made walking much easier than cutting their way directly through the marshes, and the two boys moved on quickly and easily enough for the space of nearly a mile. Then they saw what must be the island, a plot of ground not very large, roughly circular in shape, but higher and drier than the reedy marsh land which completely surrounded it, except for a broken, half-sunken old stone causeway which joined the ridge to it. Willow trees grew on it, and as the boys approached they could make out some stone walls, evidently the ruins of some ancient building, and near that a hut made of mud and willow withies, old and small and sagging out of shape. "There it is," said Dickon, pointing. "And there is Blaharis, the hermit himself, sitting in front of his hut," added Hugh. They both paused, hesitating to go straight up to the old man, uninvited as they were. If his madness should suddenly make him turn ugly, getting away over the broken causeway and rough ridge road would not be altogether easy. "What shall we say?" queried Dickon. "Oh, just be friendly," said Hugh with a confidence he was far from feeling. "Just tell him we were out this way and stepped in? Yes, being a hermit who chooses to live apart from all the world, we thought he'd like us to be neighbourly. Sounds natural and pleasant, doesn't it?" Hugh chuckled at his sarcasm. "Well, come on anyway," he said. "If he knows anything about that holy cup, I want to hear it." They started forward again, making their way carefully over the jagged stone remains of the old causeway, which was partly sunk and almost hidden by overgrowing willows. From this a path straggled up toward the hut, and the ruins behind it. The two boys were almost upon the hermit before he saw them. He was sitting on a large stone which had evidently once been part of the broken walls, his hands folded in his lap, his head bowed, deep in thought. The sound of their near footsteps roused him, and he looked up. For a full moment he gazed at them in astonished silence while they gazed back, ready to turn and run for their lives if he proved dangerously hostile. He rose slowly to his feet, bowed with great dignity and composure, then lifted his two hands with a motion that was both welcoming and apologetic. "Ah," said he, "so the young sirs have deigned at last to visit the old master of Beckery. My lords, you are welcome indeed to my poor castle. Alas, the drawbridge is broken, the moat dry and blistering in the sun, the walls of the dungeon fallen and grown over with ivy. But enter, enter, my good lords. The feet of the best knights in all God's world have trod these stones. The noblest and the highest born among men have sat before my hearth and knelt in yon sanctified and holy oratory." The boys stood speechless. The hermit, with another gracious sweeping gesture, indicated the door of his hut, and evidently expected them to go in. Hugh led the way, hesitantly, and Dickon followed. The lintel was so low that even they must bow their heads to enter, and the tall hermit had to bend almost double until he had got into the middle of the hut. Inside were a bed made of willow branches, partly covered with a rough blanket, a block of stone standing upright with another thinner block on top of it, thereby making a table, and a chest, a great black oak chest, much like the three in the underground chamber. On the top of this chest stood 2 iron candlesticks, with half-burnt candles in them, and a plain iron cross. On the floor near it rested the bell and stone lantern the boys had seen when they had come upon the old man in the underground treasure chamber. Bleharis noticed how their gaze rested on the chest which stood against the back of the hut, the eastern end, which was the proper place for an altar. "Mine oratory," said he, with a wave of his hand. Then he sighed heavily. "Since the old and sacred chapel of Beckery, the chapel perilous, hath fallen into decay, I do my humble best to maintain the sanctuary, to keep the light burning until such time as the ancient splendor shall come again, until that which is lost and hidden shall be found, and a glory not of this world shall shine forth once more upon the earth." He seemed to forget his visitors for a moment. He lifted his face, his lips moved as if in silent prayer, and there was a light in his eyes as if they beheld not the blackened walls of the low, sagging little hut, but some shining inner vision. Suddenly all fear of the old man slipped out of Hugh's heart. It seemed as if he himself had caught a tiny gleam of that vision, or at least of that light which illumined the hermit's face. "Sir," said he humbly, in a tone he scarce recognized as his own, "good Master Bleharis, we would see that shining glory too. Therefore we are come." They might have been magic words, the formula of a mystic spell for the effect they produced. The tall hermit wheeled around and fastened his eyes upon Hugh as if he would bore holes into his inmost being and behold all that lay within. "Dost thou know aught of it?" he whispered, his voice husky. "Hast thou seen? But no, thou hast said as much. Thou too art seeking. Lad, who art thou? Whence comest thou?" Joy had been flooding Hugh, joy and a deep thrill of wonder and expectancy, as if he were on the very brink of something that he had been waiting for all his life, and that would mean to him more than all else in the world. And now, with that old question he so dreaded to hear about himself, who he was, whence he had come, all the joy vanished, and he hesitated, stumbled, dropped his eyes miserably as though he had done wrong and were ashamed. Dickon came to the rescue. "This is Hugh," said he. "He is of our Glaston. He can read and is learning to be a scribe and a maker of books." "Ah," said the hermit, nodding his head slowly and approvingly. "Books. There is a book, lost also, but no matter now. You shall hear of that anon, if you prove worthy. And who are you, young sir?" "I am Dickon, the oblate. We came here to see you because... It was his turn this time to stumble and hesitate, but astonishingly enough the hermit seemed to need no further explanation for their presence. "I know why you have come," said he, nodding wisely. "The word has been spoken, the secret word. We are all one, all three. Hugh the young master, Dickon the oblate, and—" here he paused and straightened to his full height, so tall his head barely escaped the thatching roof, "and," he repeated impressively, "Bleharis, now hermit and seeker for that which is lost, once master of Beckery, minstrel and teller of the noblest and loveliest tales in the world." A little smile, not of complacency but of wistfulness, played across his face. "But come, I must entertain my young guests fittingly. Beckery is so old it is nigh forgotten of men, years upon years, and there comes no nightly visitor riding to the chapel perilous upon adventure bent. And now, 2 young sirs, so young, so untried, messieurs, I crave your pardon for an old man's garrulousness. I will fetch my lute directly. Sit you down before my hearth, and I will tell you of brave deeds and men-at-arms." There was, of course, no hearth, whatever in the bare cell-like hut, but Bleharis was off on a new trend of thought, picturing no doubt his surroundings as they used to be in his minstrel youth, a tapestry-decked hall with a huge fireplace under a projecting canopy, and many knights and ladies sitting and standing about, eager to hear his minstrelsy. He began to hum like a great droning bee, ran to the black chest, and, after carefully laying the candles across on the floor beside it, He lifted the lid and took out a minstrel's lute of antique design. The boys had a glimpse of the contents of the chest, which was apparently filled with all sorts of metal objects and bulky-looking bundles wrapped in white linen. The hermit closed the chest at once, replaced the cross and candles on the top of it, and running his fingers over the strings of his instrument as if all impatience to begin, he motioned the two to follow him, and stepped out of the dingy hut into the sunshine. With a wide, gracious gesture he bade them be seated, bowed to right and left as if in the midst of an audience of people, moved toward the bole of a big willow tree, and took his stand. He drew his hand, large, old, wrinkled, but perfectly steady, across the strings of his lute, in a fine, ringing chord, and began, "Listen, lords and lordlings, give ear for a little stand." There was nothing for it but to settle themselves at his feet. At first the boys looked at each other uneasily, wondering how long they would have to stay and listen, but in a few moments they were entranced, their eyes fastened upon the hermit's face, their ears attentive to every word as he chanted in a sing-song minstrel voice, clear and strong as any young teller of tales, a story which he called Sir Gawain at the Castle of the Grail.